Hey there, welcome to the Literary Escapes podcast. I'm Becky, and I'm glad you're here today. If you're a fan of books that give you an escape or let you explore other cultures, then you're definitely in the right place. So I'm glad you've joined us today. Stick around, we've got a great author interview for you, so let's jump right in. Welcome back to the Literary Escape podcast. Today I have the pleasure of talking with historical author Brynn Barineau. So let's jump right into the interview. Brynn Barineau, welcome to the Literary Escape podcast. I'm happy to have you today.
I am very happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Becky.
Oh, my pleasure. We were just talking about how hard it is to put yourself out there. And as an author, especially when a lot of authors are introverts, and how necessary that is these days. Do you consider yourself an introvert?
I consider myself, a few years ago, I read the term extroverted introvert.
Okay.
Meaning I don't mind speaking in front of crowds. I actually was a high school thespian.
Nice.
But then I need to recharge by being alone. It does not, it drains me. It doesn't energize me.
Okay.
So after I do these things, like I will, after recording with you today, I will probably go sit quietly this afternoon and read a book to recharge.
I get you. Yeah. It's funny because I think a lot of people think that if you're introverted, you don't like people or you don't like being with people. You're shy, that kind of a thing, where it is more like how you recharge yourself. Yeah. I think there's a lot of, but anyway, I just found that stuff interesting. So
me too.
So in looking through your blog, it looks like you started as a blogger. Is that correct?
Yes. So I was a lifelong reader, like one of those kids who always had a book in their hand. Yeah. And there were family vacations where my parents took the book away because I was missing the city we were touring.
That was your punishment.
Yeah. They're like, no, we are in San Francisco. You need to see the West Coast. We are stealing your book.
I read about it.
And exactly. I read about it. I'm reading a book set in San Francisco. I don't need to look out the window.
Exactly.
But writing fiction, that just seemed like a crazy dream, like saying I want to be an actress or I want to be a singer, like I want to be a writer. Like that's not something people actually did.
Yeah.
And so I went to school for international relations, and then I met my husband and moved to Brazil. And I'm from Atlanta originally. Okay. So Rio de Janeiro was quite the change for me,
I would imagine.
And I started writing creative nonfiction and posting it on a blog as a way to process my culture shock.
Nice.
And at that time, Bill Bryson, and David Sedaris were my inspirations. And so I was doing these funny, humorous, self-deprecating, cultural observations and just processing all my culture shock in transition to living in Brazil. And then I eventually got pregnant and had my daughter in Brazil. And so there was now a whole new layer of cross-cultural parenting.
Right. And the whole medical system.
The whole medical system. And she was a preemie. It was in the NICU for 4 weeks.
Yikes.
And so I was doing all that in Portuguese. And I found this amazing community of moms, primarily mothers. There's some dads, but primarily mothers, multicultural kid blogs.
Oh, cool.
And it was parents who had either multicultural families or were living and raising children in a culture other than their own.
Okay.
And it was this consortium of bloggers in a very similar life situation to myself.
Yeah.
And so I became a part of that, and I was writing and posting on my blog. But it was definitely, I contributed some creative nonfiction essays to some anthologies. And that sort of built up my confidence as a writer and helped me find my voice.
Isn't it funny how you can find community and or maybe create it? I'm not sure which, but in the day and age that we live in, technology has allowed us such a different way of creating our communities.
Oh, for sure. Some of the moms I was most close to, the editors of the anthology, they were all over the world.
Isn't that amazing?
In the Netherlands. Yeah, they were in the Netherlands, or they were in Germany, or in China. And
I love that.
So this community was entirely virtual, even before the pandemic.
That's just amazing. I love that. I have a book club, and it has people from around the world in it. And I just find that just amazing. And I love it. So, yeah.
I think that is the really miraculous part of the internet. Like that allows us to find and build connections and find people similar to ourselves all over the world.
Yeah.
And so
and you can feel just as close to them as you can like the person that lives across the street or, down the road or whatever. And
yes.
I love that.
You can find someone who's going through a similar situation and they live in Ghana and you connect. And so that whole being part of that community, that writers, moms and writers, built up my confidence. And I had some ideas for fiction and I was like, try. And it also was sort of more a creative outlet after my daughter was born. Because at some point I found writing about my real life challenges with parenting. I was like, I don't want to keep dwelling in the difficulties. I need a bit of an escape.
Right.
So I turned to fiction.
Nice.
Writing.
Okay. So living in Brazil, do you speak Portuguese?
I did learn it.
Okay.
My husband tells people I'm fluent. He is being very generous. I say I'm functional in Portuguese.
That's
like
enough.
I can go to the bank and I can, being a foreigner there, I had to deal with the federal police. And so I could go to the federal police by myself and, work out visa stuff. And all my daughter's doctors in Victoria, the city where we lived, did not have a huge tourist industry. So there was not much English.
Did you have like the access to like Google Translate or something like that at that point?
It existed. It is not great. And I know this because I taught high schoolers, and their classes were in English, and I could very clearly see when they used Google Translate to just translate a Portuguese sentence into English. It was very apparent which students used Google Translate for their essays. But I haven't used it for years. I know AI has improved a lot. It might be much better than it was 8 years ago.
That's funny.
So it was just my own brain and and how much sleep I had the night before really affected my level of Portuguese for the day.
You there. My family and I were in Spain one time, and my husband, who doesn't know Spanish, went to the grocery store and did a lot of pointing and trying to figure out how to explain.
It is amazing how effective body language is. Body language is.
So I can appreciate how challenging it could be. And especially all the different situations you found yourself in. That's really interesting. So your anthology that you were part of, that was Once Upon an Expat?
Yes, there was Once Upon an Expat. And that was just essays from women living all over the world. And the only criteria was that you are living in a culture not your own, like that you did not grow up in.
Nice.
And I mean, I wrote about going to the gym in Victoria. That was my essay. That's how funny. It was just the culture of gym going in Victoria, Brazil. And then the other essay anthology I was part of was Knocked Up Abroad Again.
Gotcha.
And that was specifically about being pregnant and giving birth in a country or culture not your own that you don't consider your own. And so I wrote about my daughter being born at 33 weeks and having to go into the NICU in Brazil. But there were also, less traumatic essays. Now there were some very funny essays. It wasn't all like very serious essays in that anthology. And I definitely process trauma with humor. So even my essay was kind of funny. So
that's a good way to process trauma. If you can do it, I think
if you have that in you, yes.
Yeah. That's interesting. So what was the first fiction idea that came to you? I mean, how were you inspired? How do ideas come to you, I guess?
Well, my academic background was in cross-cultural communication. And so I am very interested. I'm just naturally fascinated when people do things differently than I do. And in Brazil, it was also just histories and stories that I had never heard of. And I had studied like in international relations, I had studied like geography and world cultures at a collegiate level. And I was still, when I got to Brazil, realized I had zero education about Brazil. So the very first fiction idea I had, I decided was going to be a graphic novel because that is certainly the easiest way to get into fiction when you don't draw at all. And it,
how interesting.
and so I wrote a whole script like for a graphic novel, and it was a novel length. It would have been a novel length book, and it was about, it was inspired by the religion Candomblé, which is practiced in Brazil.
Okay.
And it is African deities that were brought over by enslaved peoples and then developed into its own Brazilian thing. And they call them orishas. And it was sort of a superhero graphic novel. I would never publish it today. It's 100% cultural appropriation. But it really launched me into like learning how to do research and how to structure a plot and character development.
What
and just
age level were you shooting for at that?
It was an adult. It was 100% an adult.
Okay. And what was the name of the religion again?
Candomblé.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's practiced today. It's not a historic religion. It is practiced. There are Candomblé practitioners in Brazil. And so that led, and so I finished that. I edited it. I queried it.
Wow. Okay.
And it was not, it was my first fiction project. I did not get an agent from that project. But I got enough good feedback, and instructive and constructive criticism that it made me think I could do this.
Nice.
But I need to get better. I need more practice. And so then I wrote a young adult dystopian and edited and queried that and got even better feedback, like no offers of representation, but more feedback.
Nice. And were you querying like around the world in Brazil?
Oh, I was in Brazil. Yeah, it was all, thank goodness for the internet, because I could not have done this in the 1990s. Because it was all via email, like all the queries, like pitching that YA dystopian. I got a little bit of, some positive feedback, won some contests through Twitter. And ultimately my agent was someone I had found initially through Twitter and interacted with through Twitter.
Yeah, I've heard that before. And that's so
I was in Brazil. Yeah, I was in Brazil and I was reaching out to agents in the United States. Because I knew I was writing in English and I wanted to publish in the United States.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
And I cannot write fiction in Portuguese. My Portuguese.
That would be,
English is my only language for writing.
Yeah.
And so I was querying agents in the United States from Brazil. And then the third project was a historical fiction.
And then Jaguars and Other Game?
That is Jaguars and Other Game.
That one sounds super interesting. I was looking into that one, and we may have a conversation about my book club. I might have you.
I might pitch you to come. Book clubs. Book clubs are my favorite part of publishing. I've done 3 in Atlanta, and I love them. They're my favorite part.
Okay, we'll talk about that then. I'm excited about that. So tell us about that story.
Jaguars and Other Game is a gender-flipped Three Musketeers set in 1809 Rio de Janeiro. And it was inspired by my love of the Three Musketeers, good sword fights, Pirates of the Caribbean, Princess Bride, and this completely unknown in the United States piece of Brazilian history. The entire Portuguese royal family and 10,000 of their closest friends fled Napoleon to Rio de Janeiro in 1808. They moved the entire Portuguese court to Brazil, and they established a united kingdom of Brazil and Portugal.
Wow.
And it is the only time in the history of European colonialism that the European royal family moved to the colony and made the colony the heart of the empire. And I had never heard of that.
That's amazing. Yeah. I've not heard that one either.
It's fascinating. So you have this bunch of European nobility and court members showing up in this tropical port city in Brazil. And I thought that was, it was too fascinating and too unbelievable to not set a story in.
So Portugal's on the coast, obviously.
Right.
And are they tropical?
Portugal's not, maybe the southern tip. I'm trying to picture my map here.
Yeah.
They're warm. But I don't, are they in the tropics technically? Maybe southern Portugal might be in the tropics.
Because, it's close
Where's
to
like the tropic
Africa,
of like Cancer?
Is that tropical? I don't know. Yeah.
I honestly don't know.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah. Just curious because I don't equate that as tropical. So I guess
in my head, I definitely don't think of it as a tropical culture or city place.
Right.
But I mean, because they will get snow in Portugal, and Rio does not. Like Rio, maybe you need a light jacket in winter. It can get a little brisk.
Okay. Interesting, huh? And Rio's got mountains, and
Rio does have mountains. Rio is amazing.
Okay.
It does not get cold there. Wow. In southern Brazil, very southern Brazil, you can get a little snow in the very south of Brazil, but it usually makes the national news. And they're like, it snowed down south.
I'm in Florida, so it's probably similar.
Right. It's exactly. Like that would be unheard of.
Very rare occasions we get snow, and it's decades between.
but Rio itself, which is where the book is set, does not get snow. It is not snowy. Ever.
Okay, even so you've got this court that has moved to Brazil, to Rio.
Yes.
And
so my story takes place. So I just found that was amazing. Like, okay, so this is a story. And I started researching. There was some popular fiction about that time period. And, the court's moving in, there's all these tensions between the locals and the recently arrived Europeans, the royal family. At the time, it was ruled by the Prince Regent because the queen had been declared insane. And so in Brazil, she's known as Mad Queen Maria.
I saw that and I was like, is that like,
that's true. That's historically accurate. Yeah, that's historically accurate.
Love it. Okay.
Today, they think she probably had a severe form of bipolar disorder.
Okay.
But in 1800, they did not have those terms or that knowledge. And so she was declared mentally unfit. Sure. And her son took over and ruled as regent. And her son is just real life comic relief. I mean, it's just, and I was reading about these over the top, like, unstable royals. I mean, and he was married to the princess at the time, hated him. Like she just was like, had nothing but disdain for her husband.
Well, they did a lot of
Spain.
Intercultural marriages.
Yes,
just
she was a Spanish
reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. She was from Spain and just had nothing but disdain for her husband. And she was betrothed at the age of 10 and they actually married when she was 14. And by all accounts, much more competent than her husband, much smarter, but also way meaner. And so the royal family was like amazing, just characters. It's like, awesome. I'm not creative enough to come up with this cast. That's so fun.
I love it.
So they are all in the book, but they're not the protagonists. My protagonists are two young women from Rio de Janeiro. Okay. And then one young woman from Portugal who came with the royal family. Okay. And she is actually a maid to Mad Queen Maria. She's in service to Mad Queen Maria. So we have Victoria from Portugal and Maria and Isabel from Rio. Okay. And they are my tropical three musketeers. And the book revolves around them.
Okay. And so they have an adventure, presumably, if they're the three musketeers.
Yes, I pitch the book as a historical adventure. That's why I call rather than just historical fiction. I say it is a historical adventure.
I love that. We need more adventure.
That's what I want. I mean, it came out, I wrote it and finished it before the pandemic. So I can't say that this was an escapist inspired by the pandemic. But I love those fun adventures so much.
Absolutely.
And so often it is almost entirely a cast of men. With like the one token female friend, or like
and she's purely sexy.
The girlfriend who gets to go along, but she's just tough enough to fit in with the crowd. And I was like, but I'm a woman and I have like kick-ass friends. So I think, I want it to be all women.
I love that.
And so a lifelong friend of Maria and Isabel's is wrongly accused and arrested for murder.
Okay.
And they are people of color. Maria and her friend Mateus are Black, and Isabel is mixed race, Guarani, and white Portuguese. And they know the only way they're going to get their friend out of prison is to find the real murderer. So the whole book, the adventure, is them tracking down, hunting the real murderer in Rio to try and save their friend from execution.
Nice.
And very early in the book, they meet Victoria. They rescue her. And she becomes their into the court. And so they work together. And the whole book, they are trying to save their friend from execution. by finding a murderer.
How fun. I love that. And so that one came out just recently, right?
Came out in November. Yes.
Nice. Okay. And so have you got another book that you're working on?
I'm on submission with a book right now. It's another historical fiction, and it's a star-crossed lovers set on Henry Ford's Amazonian rubber plantation.
Wow. Okay.
So in the 1920s, Henry Ford bought a piece of the Amazon rainforest the size of Delaware.
Wow.
And decided he was going to make his own rubber for his car. He was going to grow his own rubber.
Of course.
And that's what he decided. I mean, he was the richest man in the world by the end of the 20s. Yeah. So he's like, yeah, I'm going to buy a piece of the Amazon and grow my own rubber. And so he tried to build, he didn't just try to make a little plantation. He tried to recreate a Midwestern town in the middle of the Amazon, and shipped down prefabricated homes, shipped down school buses and white picket fences, and shipped down all his managers from Iron Mountain and Detroit, and sent them to the Amazon to try and have an industrial rubber farm in 1928, 29.
Based on a true story.
This is true. Okay. This is true. My protagonists are fictional. Again, right. I seem to pick a real place and real people, create real fictional events. Protagonists to exist in that real time in history.
I love that.
And so and so we have star-crossed lovers on Ford's rubber plantation in the Amazon.
How fun. And now which country is the Amazon? Because
it's in the Brazilian section. It's in many countries in South America. But this was in Brazil. Henry Ford, the piece of land he purchased was in Brazil. Okay. And it was another amazing historical fact that I only learned by living in Brazil. And Brazilians are like, oh, have you been to Fordlandia? And I'm like, Fordlandia? I've not even heard of what is that? And they're like, well, it's the remains of this town that Henry Ford built in the middle of the Amazon. And I was like, Henry Ford built a town in the Amazon? And there was tennis courts and a swimming pool.
What?
And
wow. That's amazing. And so was this town successful?
No.
Okay.
I mean, as crazy, like if it sounds crazy, it was, and it didn't really work. And sort of like both Jaguars, Another Game, and the book I have on submission sort of critique the lack of humility by those in power. And it's definitely a critique of Ford's, just undying belief and certainty and his ability to know everything and do everything better.
Yeah.
Because he was successful in some areas, he just assumed he always knew the right thing to do and was very uncompromising. And the company's lack of humility definitely planted the seeds that the city inevitably failed. But my story takes place in the first 2 years of the town's Fordlandia's founding.
Okay.
So hopefully we just went on submission.
Hopefully we get to read that. That would be fun.
December. So hopefully, fingers crossed. If that sounds interesting, you can go buy Jaguars and Other Games and get those sales numbers up. So when marketing departments look at me, because traditional publishing, they're like, it's all about the numbers. They want to say it's about art, but it's a lot about, it's a business.
It's a business. Yeah, mm-hmm. It's a business. And that's one of the interesting things. If you're going to be, whether you're self-published or traditionally published, you still get to do a lot of your own marketing.
Oh,
and it's
a lot of hard work
that go into being an author aren't necessarily
I'm very
marketing.
good at writing. I am not a publicist. That is not what I studied.
Yeah.
That's not where my skill set is. So that's been a whole new job I've taken.
It is a job
since getting a publisher, and I am traditionally published. It's a small press, but and I still did all my own marketing and publicity pretty much. So
you're with a press here in Orlando, right?
Yes, Orange Blossom.
Ariel. Yeah, I've met her before. She's very nice. Yeah,
she's amazing. Yeah, she's great.
I love that. So are you writing another book right now, or just working on?
I have a couple ideas. I've outlined, and have some sketches and started doing research, because one is historical fiction again, and I tend to find a time period or a setting that I'm interested in, and then I start researching. I start reading about it, and then the story comes out of the research.
Okay.
So,
okay.
And then
are you sticking to Brazil, or are you branching out?
No, this idea is in medieval Europe, like medieval France.
Okay.
But then I have another idea. I think a lot of authors will have multiple ideas they start kind of pursuing, and then a character or a scene for one grabs you, and then you just keep going, and you're like, well, this is the next project. So the other project I'm kind of flirting with is a locked room murder mystery, which I love to read, and I'm not sure I'm smart enough to plot, because the plot is so intricate for one of those. And I was like, wow, that would really push my skills.
That would be interesting. Yeah. I've thought it would be so much fun to write like a cozy mystery or something. But the idea of like, you have to have, somebody murdered, presumably red herrings, some sort of looking for how you figure out who it is, yeah.
And then deciding like what information, the order that the clues fall so that it feels realistic, and like pacing of how much information the reader gets.
Exactly.
But then I would really want it to, once the mystery is solved, the reader be like, could go back and see that, yes, the clues were there the whole time. Because what I hate more than anything is when like some like Deus Ex Machina, some crazy thing happens at the end that you could not have seen coming. The killer is this person that wasn't even character
even in the story
the whole time. Wasn't even in the story until the end. That drives me crazy. I hate that. I was like, that's lazy. Like,
it is.
I think it's lazy. I think it's easy writing. So I would definitely want to create a plot where like the reader could go back and see that, like the clues were there the whole time. That
would be fun. Yeah.
But it is very hard. So like I'm a little intimidated. So I have ideas. I've like done a few character sketches, but I've been a little intimidated and to actually start trying to write that plot, because that would definitely have to be plotted in advance. I don't think you can pants a lot.
That would be really
maybe
hard.
Some people do if you're really a genius.
But you'd have to go back and
layer in the clues.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking to Reese Bowen a couple of years ago, who writes historical fiction and mysteries in particular. And she was saying that she has a long hallway in her house, and she had to lay all the different scenes out and figure out. Yeah. And I thought that I'm very visual. So that spoke to me of, having to lay things out, and so you can
to physically see all the beats. Exactly. I do it with note cards. I write every scene on a note card and lay it out. See if something's too long or if some information needs to come earlier, and physically move the cards around. Yeah, it's so helpful.
It is. Because I have to see and feel things as well. So it's that's interesting. So when you read, what do you like to read?
I read all over the place. I read some historical fiction, admittedly less if I'm right in the middle of writing that. I will read outside the genre I'm writing,
makes sense.
But I also love thrillers. I like literary fiction. I will read, I love graphic novels and science fiction fantasy. Like I really will read pretty much everything.
That's awesome.
Actually, right now, I just finished recently a thriller, The Writing Retreat. I'm on my next up to read is The Woman with the Cure by Lynn Cullen, which is historical fiction. And The Writing Retreat was good. That was definitely a thriller. That's a great beach read. But my favorite read this year so far is, I don't know if it's literary fiction. It's sort of historical. It's like the 80s and 90s, but it's Tomorrow and Tomorrow, Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin.
I've heard of that one. Somebody else mentioned that one.
So good. Amazing.
That's so interesting.
That's the kind of book where I put it down. I'm like, that's how I want to write. Like, I want to write as well as she does someday.
That's really cool. I'm going to have to check that one out, because that's two people now that I've spoken to.
It's amazing. It deserves really all the praise. It's gotten a lot of hype. It was a Jimmy Fallon's first, the inaugural book pick for his book club.
I didn't even know he had a book club.
I did. Yeah. It deserves all the praise. It's very that good, cool. I thought.
Okay. Very cool. So where can readers hang out with you? Are you on the socials?
I am on the socials. You can
kind of
find
have
me
to
on
be, don't you?
Instagram. You have to be on Instagram. Yeah, you have to be nowadays. Instagram by far is my favorite social.
Okay.
I just find it, of all the social medias, like the most positive place of them all. Like,
Nice. Yeah.
And I don't do video. I'm too old to do video. I don't do TikTok. Like I don't, sorry, that's not me. Like I only have so much energy in a day, and I just can't do dances and video. Like, so, but I am on Instagram.
Okay.
And I am also on Facebook. Okay. And I do have a blog, although I haven't updated it recently because I just took on a full-time job. Oh. And but you can find me on Instagram at Brynn Barineau. It's my full name. Brynnn Barineau, Brynn Barineau.
I'll link that in the show notes. And you have on your website, it looked like you had an email. Is that?
Yes, you can Brynn at BrynnBarineau.com. So if you want to shoot me an email.
Do you have a newsletter, I guess?
I do. And you can sign up for the newsletter on my website, which you can go to BrynnBarineau.com. It's my name. Also, it will link to the old website, Brynn in Brazil, which is the website I had. I am not tech savvy. I don't know how to totally make that name disappear because I'm no longer in Brazil. I'm back in Atlanta since the pandemic with my family. And so it's not totally accurate, but BrynnBarineau.com will get you to my website and you can sign up for my newsletter, and that will tell you about events I have coming up or book signings.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And I know like in the fall, like things have kind of slowed down for the summer, but in the fall, I'm doing an event at Gwinnett County Public Libraries, and I'll be doing a joint event at Foxtail Books, one of the great indie bookstores in Metro Atlanta.
Nice. Nice. I love Atlanta.
Atlanta, it is such a literary city. Like Atlanta, really, we have so many amazing independent bookstores. Karis Books, the oldest feminist bookstore in the Southeast, is in Atlanta. Little Shop of Stories, one of the best kids bookstores in the country. Foxtail, Acapella. I could keep going.
That's awesome.
And there's so many great authors. It's a great literary city.
That's fun.
It is my hometown, so I might be biased, but I think Atlanta's
it's fun living in that too, and visiting that. I think that's a really cool thing. When I visit cities, I always look for bookstores, and at my book club, we go to different destinations each month.
Oh, fun!
And so we've been around the world, quote unquote, in our books for the last 2.5 years now. And so
that's books are such a great way to travel.
They are. And the different genres give you different pieces of a culture, and which I find fascinating. So we haven't visited Atlanta yet, though, in our books. And so I'm going to have to do a little digging on that one because I really do enjoy it. Atlanta, just in general, I think it's a really fun place to be. So that's fun. Well, thank you, Brynn, for being here with me today. This has been a lot of fun.
It has been fun. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for joining me today on the Literary Escape podcast. If you enjoy hearing the behind the book story, then join me in the Literary Escape Society. We are a community of travelers who love books, or maybe book lovers who love to travel. Either way, if you need an escape, a literary escape, come join us as we read our way around the world together, one book at a time. Check out the show notes to learn more about the Literary Escape Society. And we'll see you next time on the next episode.